From the Department of Communication in Phillipsburg, this is a special edition of Inside Government with Charity Dunker.
Welcome back, and this is part 2 of our edition of Inside Government interview with social worker pioneer, none other than Mistress Elaine Gumbs Vlaun. Now, welcome back again.
Thank you.
Let's continue. We notice in the field of social workers, I would say throughout the Caribbean, let's stick with our region. Predominantly, it's female. Where are males at? How do you feel about that?
You have to ask, how are we being raised?
Okay.
Because we are being raised that women
Yeah.
are the ones who take care of children. You're talking about social work. What about kindergarten? How many male kindergarten teachers do we have? And that's where it has to start. It has to start with a very young that they get accustomed, and some of them don't even have a father figure. So it would be wonderful if they can have a father figure from the kindergarten years onward. And I think by having that, eventually the feeling of young men too will become more leaning towards doing this kind of work. But just to go to someone and explain them what social work is, no, I don't think so. It has to be ingrown. There are a couple of them who did it, but it's really an exception.
Yeah.
And it has to be more a norm than an exception. But we have to work on it ourselves when we are grooming our own kids.
Yeah.
That, boys and girls can do the same thing. Nowadays, you don't have anything that is specifically for men to do or specifically for women to do. We have a lot of male work that women do now, and men do the female work also.
Yeah.
I always say a woman who can cook well can cook. But once you have a man who can cook, he is good. Because normally the male chefs sometimes outshine the female chefs. I think it's because they feel they have to put more into it because they are not a woman.
Yeah.
So they put more into it. And we have to get some of that feeling into our young men, that nobody's going to laugh at them for doing certain things that women normally would do.
Now today, although not having all the needed services, right? What would you say that you could actually, okay, let's rephrase this question now. In order for us to reach our target goal, if any, you and your profession, what would you like to see have changed? Now we're talking about the whole industry being mostly for social workers, dominated by females. Where you just mentioned that it would be nice to see more men,
yes.
Taking up and studying in that field of that profession. What do you say can also change it? You mentioned, let's look at how they're being raised. What are the...
It's a stigma. And that stigma has to disappear. That this type of work is only for women. But we, as educators, we have to take away that stigma from the minds of the young men or of men on the whole, because we still have macho men.
Yeah.
Right? That's a man's work, and that's a woman's work. No. There are lots of things that men are doing that women can do, and lots of things that women are doing that men can also do. But it all depends on the upbringing. Otherwise, you're not going to have a change. Or they will have to be put in a situation where they see these things and that they say, hey, I never looked at it that way. Maybe I can contribute to being in that field. But as I say, it all depends on your upbringing and the stigma that has to be wiped away.
I always wondered to myself, now I'm going to take it to me, when I see social workers, I always wonder, because we all should have someone that we can talk to and confide in. How does that work for a social worker? Is it the same? Do you also reach out to your fellow colleague when you're in need of someone to talk to? How does that work for a social worker?
I think it's just like anybody else. You're just a person. You don't put social work up front. A social worker is not a perfect person. You also have your problems, and sometimes you want to air your problems or voice your opinion on certain things. I don't see why it can't be done.
Okay.
You know?
Confidentiality. Many worry about that when being approached by a social worker, or if they want to reach out and talk to a social worker. We see many cases of suicide. Yeah. And then we mention and we talk about it being a mental issue. Many people are very silent about it, don't want to be stigmatized. What would you say about that? What's your take on that?
About the stigmatization,
Yes.
or
Stigmatization and also
the privacy,
feeling, yes,
confidentiality.
the confidentiality part.
Okay. You have to work on that yourself. People will have to know that you're not spreading their business on the street. You know, and I have heard about cases where colleagues, maybe younger colleagues or ex-colleagues, I must call them because I am out of the field now, but sometimes you hear things that they have said about people, you know, and it hurts. And that's the breach of confidentiality. It hurts because I'm not coming to you with my problem for you to be spreading it on the street. So I have to be the one, the worker, I have to be the one that I can assure you and prove to you that whatever you tell me remains with me.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes you have to discuss it with your colleagues in the office, but it has to remain there. If you have to write a report, sometimes you can't even, you know, you have to put a little flower and a little ribbon around it, because when it reaches another office, you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's difficult, but you have to at least show the person and let
Build
the
that
person
in them.
have confidence
Yeah.
in you, that they can confide in you, and you will keep their problem a secret between you and them.
Okay. Social work can be a very demanding task on the social worker. What would be the words of encouragement to social workers out there?
There's always a light at the end of the tunnel.
Repeat that again so we can hear
There's
you.
always a light at the end of the tunnel. And I'm going to be very honest with you. Sometimes I didn't used to see that light. And I was very depressed at times when people would come with so many problems, and I'm just one person. What can I do? How can I help them? And then one person comes back to you and say, Miss Vlaun, thanks for your advice. XYZ has been happening. I'm getting through. And then all of a sudden you see that light. You say, okay, I'm not going to give up.
Yeah.
Because there were many a day that being alone at that time that I wanted to give up. Because I felt that, hey, I can't help these people. I'm just one person, and there are hundreds of people that you have to help. I mean, St. Martin wasn't populated like how it is now, but one social worker for the whole island, that was not easy.
Yeah.
Even now, I think we still don't have enough social workers, and there are quite a few, you know. But just have courage, and remember that there's always a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. At times, would you hear the cries of many, and what you recommend to other social workers? So you sit down, for example, you're sitting in a room with a fellow social worker, you know, and then given your years of expertise, what would you say to them besides the light at the end of the tunnel?
One step at a time, one day at a time. Don't think you can change the world in a day, because some of us feel that because we studied for that particular field, that we are supposed to know it all. We are not. We are learning. We continue to be in a learning process. I am not so young anymore, but I'm still in a learning process, because there are things that you see that you have never seen before, things that you hear that you have never heard before, and it's like, hey, you know, how do I deal with this? But you have to sit down and ponder over these things, and don't come to any rash decisions, because that, yes, can mess up the whole thing. So you take your time and you talk to the person. If the person has a problem that you don't really understand, you ask them to explain you better, because you don't see the connection with what they are trying to tell you. Maybe you, in the back of your head, you think, hey, I think I know where they're going to, but you want some more clarity from them. So you take your time, step by step, and they will open up step by step also, and eventually you'll hear their problem, because some people have a very difficult time to talk about their problems. So you don't rush them, not because you're sitting in an office and you want your work to be done, or you go home by them and, okay, I have a meeting in the next 2 hours, I have to rush. You explain them, we can sit down and talk. I do have a meeting in the next 2 hours and I will have to leave, but if we don't get through now, I'll come back, or you can come by me and we'll continue talking about it.
Before we run out of time and we have to take that break, as a social worker, how do you, in your practice, how do you speak with children versus adults? How do you handle that?
Sometimes you have to speak to adults as if you're speaking to
children. Yeah.
Very simple language. And just try by talking to them. When you hear them talking, you know how you have to react. You just don't put your ideas on them or tell them you don't tell them what to do. You have to get information from them, and the two of you together. It's not you alone, not because maybe you have a better idea of how to solve things. It may not be a good idea for them. So you have to find out their situation, what can be done in their situation, and then try to guide them to go into the right direction.
Okay. Well, television viewers and radio listeners, we're going to be taking that break. Once again, this is an inside government interview with yours truly, Charity Duncan, being joined by pioneer Mistress Elaine Gumbs Vlaun. I'll be back right after this. Don't touch it.
Humans, animals, organisms, and plants are all part of our existence on this earth, each living and surviving while contributing to a collective and balanced ecosystem that allows us all to exist interdependently, none more valuable or important than the next. Sharks, stingrays, sea turtles, marine mammals like dolphins and whales, stony coral and brown pelicans are all part of the animal species on St. Martin that are protected. They are protected because they are endangered. It is illegal to catch, disturb, injure, and/or kill any of these protected species, or even disturb their nesting or living habitat. If you have caught any of these endangered animal species unintentionally, release them immediately. If you see someone violating these laws, kindly let them know that their actions are wrong, unethical, and illegal. If you see any of these irregularities, report the incident to the Nature Foundation, the Coast Guard, or the police. By protecting our natural environment and our endangered species, we can maintain a healthy biodiversity and a balanced ecosystem that we all can exist and thrive and call home. Our home, St. Martin.
This message was brought to you by environmentalist Tazio Bervuts and the Department of Communication.
Welcome back, and thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Government Interview. None other than Mistress Elaine Gumbs Vlaun, our pioneer here, social worker. As a social worker, let's take it to back then. You have your family, your personal life, your on and on switch. How did you change from when you're at home and then your professional working life?
I must say it took time to switch. I remember when I was studying, I used to cry myself to sleep because there were certain cases that you would get. And when I was doing my internship, especially, I got one case and I just couldn't sleep for nights. And I spoke to my stage begeleidster and she told me you have to cut it off when you reach home, cut it off. I told her it was so difficult, but eventually you learn. She said, just put it behind you because you're going to be tired tomorrow if you continue. So just go to bed. When you get up tomorrow, you continue. When I was working here, it was like I used to work maybe about 12 to 16 hours a day because you go home, especially since the office was small, we had, the work was piling up because you were working, a handful of us with the social welfare, we were working for the whole island, of course, and you never had enough time to finish writing reports. So what we used to do is stay back at 5, try to write reports, go home 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night, and I would go behind my computer again, write some more reports, and sometimes 12 o'clock at night is when you stop working.
Yeah.
And when the children were small, at 4, you're up again to get them ready for school, and then you had to go to work and everything. So eventually I said, no, you can't continue working like that. It's too much. At a certain point, I remember I was asked, why not take my bed to the office?
Why not take your bed to the office?
To the office,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah.
Because, you know, when you're supposed to be sleeping, you're working. But eventually you learn. You learn that when you're out of the office, things still bother you. There are certain things that bother you, but you try to
Put it behind back.
put it, yes, because tomorrow is another day,
Yeah.
and then you can continue.
How much hours you would say you put into being a social worker?
Oh, countless.
Yeah.
Countless, because from the beginning, even when I started at the Voogdijraad, all hours of the night you would be working. People would call you 3 o'clock in the morning with problems. That was my experience. Any hour of the day or the night. My husband at a certain point told me, you can sit in the hall by the telephone because the telephone would ring and I would bring it into the bedroom. So he told me, go and sleep in the hall by the telephone. People have a problem.
Yeah.
You know, and they are not going to wait. The problem can't wait until 7:30 when the office opens. The problem is now. And they need somebody to talk to. And sometimes it was just a matter of talking to the person.
Yeah.
And it was okay. You know? But those are things that you have to go through. And I never refused anyone calling me any hour of the night. You know? I know if it's a problem. If it's not a problem, they're not going to call.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but you learn to switch off and on. And sometimes even in the office, you switch off for a while. You know, you just close the door and say, hey, I got to catch myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and you go through something, maybe a book or something, you page through a book, you read 1 or 2 chapters, and you're good to go again.
Speaking of reading and you know, I guess as a social worker as well, you want to stay motivated. You also want to be a well-versed in that field. So how often did you see yourself going to workshops or you know, anything to enhance your knowledge in the social worker field?
Well, when I was working as a younger person then, once you grew older, you weren't really going to too many places. But as a younger person, we were invited to go to different workshops internationally, locally, nationally. So that was a great help, you know. And we had something called, I can't even remember, can't remember the full name, but that was in Curacao. And once a month, a bunch of social workers used to meet. Okay. So we had those kind of meetings. And one of the ministers had a workshop for many people on the different islands. And it was, that was an experience because most of the people in Curacao, you know, they come back as Dr. Anders this and Dr. Anders that, and they were very proud of that. And we weren't Dr. Anders. We were just plain old social workers doing our work. And those people were sitting in an office. I sat in an office too, but many a time I had to close my office to go and visit people. So we had to write a paper for that particular thing. And we only knew 3 days ahead that we had to come to the meeting and that we had to write a paper. At that time, Errol Harmony was working, Maria Kruithoff was working, and I had to represent St. Martin. So I told him, I said, boy, I need your help.
Yeah.
Just put a couple notes on paper for me and I'll take it from there. So the night we went to Curacao, I was writing the whole night, handwritten, because we didn't have time to type up anything. Handwritten until 7 o'clock in the morning, run for breakfast, and go to the meeting for 9 o'clock.
Wow.
And our paper, and I always say thanks to Errol and Maria, our paper was the star, because they took that as the basis for the report that they had to write. And the minister told us, this is what we need, the groundwork. We don't need people who can write policies and all whatnot. We need to know what's going on the ground. You know, and I was so proud of it. I couldn't stop talking about it with Maria.
So he wanted
and
to
Errol.
hear more from the field workers.
Yes, yes. Yeah. And we had the two things, the policy and the groundwork. And that was used as the national report. So I said, look at that, Little St. Martin, last minute invitation, but we did it, we pulled it off.
Had to be a proud moment, right?
Oh yes, definitely. Yeah. But we went, then also with women's work, we were invited to a lot of, I was involved in women's work, and we were invited to different things, Cuba, Beijing, all over the place. I didn't go to Beijing, sorry. That was in 95, and I refused to go because of the hurricane season. And my children were small.
Yeah.
And I told them, I'm not leaving the children behind in the hurricane season, even though, you know, I had my mother with my sisters and brothers, my husband. But I wasn't leaving the island in the hurricane season, and I was glad I didn't.
Because that's when we had...
Yes.
Louis.
Yes. And then when those who went came back, they wanted to know how it was, and I told them, I can't tell you. You had to experience it yourself.
Yeah. Speaking of that time, Hurricane 95, Louis, what was that like for you as a social worker and having to deal with different cases and persons who were going through it, yeah?
Yes. Well, we had a double work at that time, because we didn't only had to deal with people who lost homes and needed help and everything, but we were also involved in sharing all the material. I learned a lot about construction in 95 because we were on the dump, over on the dump, and everything was there. I learned how to calculate how much would somebody need to do what, you know?
Yeah.
There were the people who would help you, because I didn't know anything about it. So they would tell you, if somebody asks you, for instance, for a 2x12, and you don't have a 2x12, but you have a 2x16, and they need so many pieces of 2x12, you give them so many pieces of 2x16, because certain things they can join.
Yeah.
So I learned a lot about that. So my office was left up to the 2-3 girls who were there, and then 5 o'clock is when you would go into the office to find out what was happening.
Yeah.
So it was rough. It was rough on us because we were doing double work, you know, but we pulled through, and lots of people got help because someone was always there to help them with material that they needed. If I wasn't there alone, there was somebody else helping me. The men who were in construction who would come for material to help other people, they would help me. When people came, they would work calculation and, you know, so. But it was rough. It was very rough in those days.
Given all of this, your wealth of information and your knowledge, wouldn't you think your legacy, what would you like to be remembered as in your legacy?
What would I like?
To be remembered for in doing as a social worker.
I'm just plain old Elaine, who has been a social worker and did what she had to do.
Yeah. And your motto once again?
Don't give up. There's always a light at the end of the tunnel.
And then your boys on the block, what would you say to them?
For those who were helped, I say thank you for accepting whatever little that has been done. And I would tell them, continue working hard. Because some of them are working now and they're working hard. They're not ashamed to do any kind of work as long as they have work. Yeah. And that's very, very positive. My mother always used to say, there's no work that's too menial to do, as long as you're making an honest piece of bread. Yes. And that's something I always remembered.
Our pioneer, our social worker, none other than Mistress Elaine Gumbs Vlaun. Thank you so very much for joining us on this edition of Inside Government. Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to thank you so much also for being able to share my experiences with St. Martin, the people on St. Martin, and perhaps some other social workers also.
Okay. Reason for this interview, if you have missed it, I'm hoping that you'll be able to catch it for a rebroadcast right here on St. Martin Gov Radio 107.9 FM. This is all in connection with the International Social Workers Day, and the global theme is respecting diversity through joint social action. To our radio listeners and television viewers, this brings us to the end of our Inside Government interview with none other, once again, than Mistress Elaine Gumbs Vlaun. And thank you very much for being a part of our broadcast. If you have missed this broadcast, be sure once again to tune in to St. Martin Gov Radio 107.9 FM, and also log on to the official Facebook page, Government of St. Martin, or also you could check out on YouTube channel Government of St. Martin. On behalf of our team here at the Department of Communication, I'm Charity Dunker. Thank you very much for tuning in.